IVM.
Hi, we're Team Explainer. Welcome to an all-new episode of Press Decode, a weekly podcast where we take Explainer's mission to declutter the news one step further. Check out our newsletter for more stories and follow us at Explainer In to keep up with all the fun things we plan for our Explainer fam. So sit back, relax, and don't let the news give you the blues. I'm Sarah, your in-house grumps, and I have with me Prafulla, who also stakes claim to being a grumpy uncle. Like always, we have 3 segments for you, but we have shaken things up a bit today. We'll start off with our food for thought section, where we will talk about the no stags policy that many bars and restaurants across the country. Here we will have with us the amazing author and journalist Sandip Roy joining us with his valuable insight. We'll bring our big story in the second segment, where we will discuss the biggest news of the week, the union government's decision to roll back the farm laws that farmers have been protesting against for almost a year. Finally, we will be roasting or toasting our fave and least fave item. Before we kick off our food for thought, let me first introduce our wonderful guest Sandeep, who's a novelist, journalist, radio commentator, podcaster, and generally a great person to have as a guest on Food for Thought because of the fascinating points of view he brings. Can I just say how thrilled we are to have you on board with us on Press Decode, Sandeep?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm glad this is audio so you can't see me blushing.
All right. So last week, a queer rights group called Yes We Exist India called out 1-8 Commune, which is the name of Virat Kohli's chain of restaurants, as homophobic and transphobic. Yes We Exist posted this on their social handle, and I quote, "Their Zomato listings say stags are not allowed. We DM'd them 2 weeks ago, got no response. We called the Pune branch. They confirmed that entry is only allowed for cisgender, heterosexual couples or groups of cisgender women. Gay couples or a group of gay men not allowed. Trans women are allowed subject to their clothing." The Delhi branch did not answer. Kolkata said stags are allowed, although their Zomato booking page says otherwise. 1-8 then quickly issued a statement saying, similar to industry-wide practice and in conformity with government rules, we obviously have a prohibition of stag entry policy subject to necessary relaxation in place so as to ensure a safe and enjoyable environment for our guests. That does not in any way mean that our company policy provides any discriminatory entry rules for or against any particular community. So
I'll start off. Now, no stag policies are common in nightclubs, bars, restaurants all across the country. And as a layperson, the understanding is it is to keep women safe generally. And obviously, this is very flawed because the assumption here is that all men are a hazard to women, except if they are accompanied by another woman. But this clearly leaves out people. So do we do away with the policy completely? What do you think, Sandeep?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think the policy is there for a good reason. The question now is to find out what are the problems that the policy inadvertently might be causing in spite of all its good intentions, and figure out how to fix those problems so that in the end, everybody can go to 1-8 or wherever and have a good time. And, I'm kind of tired of all the fact that so many of us, women, gay men, trans people, have all got to suffer the consequences of cis men behaving badly. I mean, isn't the real solution to this that cis men should behave better or be penalized for bad behavior so that they don't behave badly anymore, instead of people saying women shouldn't go to work after 8, or women shouldn't be alone at this workplace, or gay couples should not be allowed into a bar or a restaurant, as if we're all sort of walking around the elephant in the room, as it were, which is that so many men behave badly, especially if there's alcohol involved, but that's not even necessary.
It's funny. So a very small sample size, but I was speaking a little about the podcast and I put it on my Instagram to say, what people think. Most men said that, the stag policy is flawed, but we should, and this, I'm mostly like cis het men, are like, it's flawed, but it makes sense safety wise. And women were like, oh no, we need to rethink the policy. I don't think it works anymore. And That surprised me the most. Like, when men are like, no, we don't trust us. Women are like, oh, maybe we need to be better with policy.
Honestly, yeah, it is kind of surprising. And I should say at this point that it's very funny, but on Halloween weekend, just a month or so ago, I, in fact, for the first time, did try to go to one H commune with my partner. And we were turned away, though they didn't say anything about a stag policy. They said, oh, we have all these bookings tonight, and it's going to be such a long wait that it's no point even putting your name down on a wait list and blah, blah, blah. And I thought maybe Halloween weekend, that is true. Now, after reading all of this, I'm wondering, is this a way? And that very same night, we actually went to another sort of lounge, bar, restaurant, whatever. And the bouncer asked me, I walked up and I said, I wanted to go to this place. And this is a place where we've actually been invited to its opening when it opened. But this time when I just went on my own, without any prior warning or anything, the bouncer said, who are you with? Are you alone? I said, no, I'm with, and I pointed to my partner. And all he obviously registered was two men, but he immediately said, yeah, you can go, but there's a cover charge of 4,000 rupees. And we were like, we'll go to the Azadin Dhaba or something, it's not so important, or we'll just go home, which is probably the safest thing to do in these times. So there was obviously, sometimes the stag policy is even unspoken and unwritten. They make it up. And at that point, could I have called my friend who actually is one of the people behind this lounge bar and say, hey, I could have, but it wasn't that important to me at that moment. And I didn't feel like pulling weight, it's always very annoying to me where you have to pull a connection and say, I know the I know the owner, let me call the owner. Sure. I'm like, why should I get a special treatment? But I think this boils down to the fact that, I disagree with this group that immediately sort of off the bat call this homophobic, and it's sort of, I think that's just a way sort of our cancel culture works, where it's right now, let's see if we can get Virat Kohli cancelled, and that will gain us a lot of Twitter buzz and social media buzz and attention. But in the end, it is, I think it would have been, I bet that most of these institutions do not even think of the fact that their policy might eliminate, say, a gay couple or a trans couple, or it just does not occur to them. And maybe it's a more valuable exercise to speak to these bars and say, okay, we understand why you're doing this policy. Now, is there a way where it is not discriminatory towards, say, a gay couple, if you have no problems? And I don't know that there's an easy answer to it, but at least the beginning of the conversation is better than pinning everyone into a corner immediately and putting everyone on the defensive, because the statements were accusatory, and 1/8's response was ultra defensive as well. It was not a response saying, hey, you're right, that's a problem, can we talk about it? And I think that's the problem which we have, because we live so much of our lives on social media and Twitter, is that we are much happier creating a flame war rather than putting out the fire and seeing if ultimately your goal is really to go into this bar and have a drink and have a good time with your friends, or your goal is to create a big fuss on Twitter and get attention.
It's interesting that you would say that, Sandip, because even I was thinking about how, 1/8's response to all this was, very using all the right buzzwords and saying, yeah, inclusion. But then the actual staff probably didn't know, how to put it, which is probably because we're so used to just looking at everything in a so-called default of the hetero lens that they probably didn't have the words to, say, or thought maybe they'll get into trouble or something, because there's no sensitization for staff in general. And also the fact that they sort of went out of their way to say, no gay couples, no trans men, and only queer women if they're dressed a certain way, trans women if they're dressed a certain way. So how do we begin sensitizing people who are actually working in these places?
Yeah, I mean, the response was definitely quite tone deaf. But I think sensitization is possible, because I know, for example, organizations like the Lalit, when they started having their pink parties and hosting them in various cities, they'd had to do sensitization of the staff. And when these pink parties, these LGBTQ parties started happening in Kolkata, even then the staff there had to be sensitized on sort of bathroom preferences. You have a men's and women's, and so you may have been sensitized to gay men because cis gay men, as it were, but that doesn't necessarily mean you understand trans issues. And so the last thing you want to do at a pink party is create a fuss about what bathroom somebody is going into without understanding that this is actually quite a loaded question. And so they did, to their credit, sensitize these people. They held a training, and as far as I know, those parties have happened without any incident since then. So, I mean, where there is that will, there is obviously a way. I think people carry with them, as all of us do, the sort of biases and prejudices of this way we've grown up, the society we've grown up in. That doesn't mean everyone is inherently homophobic or transphobic or resistant to change. But the best way to bring about that change is to not accuse off the bat. I mean, I think there's plenty of room down the road when people are resistant to change, where you up the ante and, instead of launching sort of a missile cruiser at you from the get-go, maybe we can start off a little gentler. But I mean, I don't know how this group responded to 1-8 after 1-8 had that statement, but I did feel that statement was not a statement that made me want to go running out and support 1-8 and go. So fact is, I have not been there since that one abortive attempt to get into 1-8 in Kolkata.
Fair. Okay, so you mentioned the Lalit specifically, right? The Lalit now across the country is known to be a safer space for queer people. And you specifically mentioned pink party. So what does it mean then? Like, do queer Indians only go to pink parties? Like, are they just restricted from any other club because, hey, we can't figure out policy? Because here, even if, say, policy comes in that, okay, our problem is cis het men, how do you possibly maneuver something as tricky as that? Like, I was reading, it was as far back as 2011, and I hope things have evolved. But some clubs in Delhi apparently said that, okay, queer couples are allowed. And somebody was asked for hey, where's your gay certificate? Whatever that is supposed to mean. So how do you go beyond like a Lalit being a safe space to every, like, policy has to be in a way that, how do you possibly say, oh, I'm queer, so I'm okay, but the rest are not?
I don't know the answer to that. And the only reason I bring up Lalit is because I wanted to say that at least one hotel has shown that it is possible to sensitize staff to this issue. And the fact that you have Keshav Suri at the helm, who is the big boss in the hotel and is putting that cloud, because I think this is the problem in India. Like, a lot of change does not come from policy in as much as it comes from the people in charge. Everyone, as soon as sir or madam says ye kar lo, everyone says ha, no matter what the policy is. So that, I think, is an inherent problem with us, that we may have all the good policies on the book, and this probably includes many companies that have sort of politically correct, gay-friendly, non-discriminatory policies on the book. Unless people in top management are putting their weight behind their policy and pushing that policy, so a lot of that just does not get implemented on the ground level. It just becomes a little tag that their social media team does on Instagram during Pride Month and all of that. I mean, I've heard of insurance companies who advertise during Pride Month, and then somebody went and asked them, do you yourself allow domestic partner benefits? And we're like, well, no, but we're very queer supported in our own way, which is a bit like the 1-8 response saying, we are very inclusive, except to all these groups of people whom we are not going to include right now. But other than that, we're really, really inclusive. So yeah, it's unfortunately, the fact is that all this change does have to come from different organizations from the head level. And it would be reassuring if the example of Lalit pushed a different bar and establishment to do the same thing, saying that it can be done. But you're right, a lot of it is very tricky because ultimately it also, and I'm not saying this is the case of 1-8 commune, where I honestly think this was a case of more of ignorance rather than homophobia. But I do also wonder if gay couples did go into 1-8 and they were allowed without staff, whether people would be, how comfortable staff would be around that. That requires some kind of training and sensitization also. But, it's not enough to say we don't discriminate if your staff is not equipped to deal with the fact that you can have different kinds of people coming to your restaurant. But to go to your the point, Sarah, I think it is actually really unfortunate that you want to hold up things like pink parties as the only place queer people could go to being socialized. I mean, it would, apart from the price tag that requires for entry, would be very tragic if the only place that you could be safe to be queer in India comes in a sort of plush 5-star surrounding, when actually that is not the case. In fact, the LGBTQ movement in India, the safest places have often been sort of the most rundown places. That is where queer movements all over the world have been born in the outskirts. These are the outlaws. These are the places where I remember back in the day when there used to be just a couple of sort of gay bars in Mumbai. It was this one bar that was close to the Taj Hotel called Gokul's. And it was a dance bar, which was also frequented by these basically shady Middle Eastern businessmen who were coming to pick up women. And it was in that kind of shady place which was actually also the safest place for gay people and gay couples in there. And I remember I've been there only once or twice, and I went there one New Year's Eve, and it was this kind of a lot of sex workers and gay men, and in a way they were sort of protecting each other and affording safe space for each other in that place, simply because the rest of so-called polite and upper respectable society gave that place a wide berth.
That is interesting. Yeah, because that's why I thought eventually then your safe spaces become so limited and so elitist that that's just not fair at all.
But that is also the reason why, see, in the West, there was this whole culture of the gay bars and the lesbian bars all started because those could be safe spaces for where gay and lesbian people could be themselves, which they felt they could not be in just another bar down the road, because if they got beaten up in that bar, nobody would come to their help, and there were no laws to protect them at this time. And one of the reasons that now gay bars and especially lesbian bars are all on the decline in the West is because the rest of society has become more accepting. So it is, when you go to a place like San Francisco, as a gay person, other than sort of tourist or curiosity value, there's no real reason that you must go to meet another gay person only in a gay bar. You can go to any bar anywhere and you'll be fine. So while it's kind of sad on one hand, because you see the decline of the gay bars, which was such an important part of the gay movement, it is also inevitable and kind of heartening that in society that you don't need these separate out safe spaces in order to feel safe. In India, unfortunately, the LGBT movement has just sort of leapfrogged, right? We didn't go through the gay bar stage at all.
Yeah.
We've just gone from being entirely criminalized to suddenly okay overnight. And even now, there are not really gay bars per se. There's just these parties or pink parties. And I think once there are more such establishments, and people get used to the idea of seeing gay people, and that will change a lot of these policies. But of course, the difference between the West and here is that I don't know that the Western bars had many of them had these no stag policies, which a lot of Indian bars do. Maybe they did, but I don't know for that for sure.
Yeah, also going back to the original person who raised the complaints, their like solutions in the end were a list of things like, which I think we'd all agree were include bright lights and have like extra CCTV footage, take your names and numbers when you enter the club. But that's the thing, right? Now, as a woman, I would just not go then again if you're going to have like so much more surveillance. So it's such a weird, tricky situation where you go, your two options for better and more equitable an equitable experience is either lots of surveillance or you just completely shun a whole group of people away.
Yeah, which is, and horrible as it might be, that I think like a sort of interim solution almost would be if the bars need to do this sort of stag policy in order to keep safety, because they feel like they can't control a group of men if they go in on their own. That maybe gay people will need more gay bars to socialize in, where hopefully these same stag men will not want to go into something labeled a gay bar and create a ruckus, which is not necessarily an ideal solution, but in a way that has been sort of the solution that the West has employed until they came to a point where it felt that any place was safe enough for everybody. But yeah, I don't think I would be that comfortable in a place where, the whole point of going to a bar is to have lights a little dim.
Exactly.
I don't want to go to a bar and feel like I'm at the dentist's office or something like that, right? So yeah, I honestly don't think that's any more a solution than asking men to kiss at the entrance to prove that they are indeed gay. You could say, but honestly, I think if you asked a bunch of people to self-declare at the entry if they were gay or not, I don't know that these guys who were coming stag to create a ruckus in a bar, how many of them would feel happy to declare themselves as gay for the price of entering a bar? I'm not sure.
But it's unfortunate. Either the women take the hit or the queer take the hit. But it's definitely not the cishet men who are taking the hit.
That's the problem. That is my problem. And I don't know how these parts work. So if 5 men manage to find one woman willing to accompany them, it's okay. They'll be allowed in. Or is it one for one stag? I don't know. That's the thing. Like, all these rules, so much of it is contextual. So much of it is about how you in a situation where how safe you feel, and how, which group of men you feel safe around, so it's very unfortunate if 2 men who walk in and announce they're a couple are not allowed in. And even if they're not a couple, 2 gay men can go into a bar to have a drink, and just because they're not a couple and not be allowed in is just very ridiculous. So, but that's the problem with blanket rules. It just leaves you no wiggle room. I'm not unsympathetic to the poor bouncer at 1-8 or something. Well, they're just dealing with a no stag policy, and it's just simpler to have a no stag policy than to have people figure these things out. And obviously, it's much simpler to have a no stag policy than to deal with trouble inside the bar once it happens.
Okay, now this is where I have a hot take, and I don't know if I'm getting cancelled or not, but the thing is, we've all been to these clubs with no stag policies, but we've also seen groups of men who can make their way in, if they come in swanky cars, can pay exorbitant cover charges, or are just there often enough and they're regulars who order a lot. So then, this is just a garb of safety, right? Those men can be just as dangerous. So if you can make an even like 1/8 statement had a with reasonable expression, like exceptions clause. So how do they decide this exception other than if it fills their pocket? And then maybe we should ask for better than being okay with a no stag policy, no?
Yeah, I see your logic there, but but there, as soon as you put in the with reasonable exceptions clause, they'll say, oh, the reasonable exception are the people with the connections at the thing, and so there's always wiggle room around, whatever. Like somebody will get left out of the equation. And you're right. I think if we had been going to that bar lounge on a regular basis, the bouncer would have waved us in. And if we had been willing to pay that 4,000, I mean, they didn't say there was a no stag policy, but if we had been willing to, they just said 4,000. And if we were so desperate to have a drink in a bar that we wanted to pay 4,000, and there are a lot of very rich people, not even desperate, very rich people coming in the swanky cars for whom dishing out 4,000 as cover is nothing if they're determined to have a good time that night.
Yeah.
So, they can go in, and, some of the most infamous, like the infamous rape case in Kolkata, this Suzette Jordan, happened in a very swanky club with men who were being friendly and buying her drinks and offering her a ride home and all of these. So yeah, that danger is always there. And I don't know I don't know how much these policies have always helped. I mean, I think they're done with the best intentions, but it is definitely time to think if there is a better way to do this. So you don't have to put out shamefaced statements saying, "Oh, we definitely believe in inclusion, but we're not going to include you," which was quite lame, to be honest.
Also, it's quite sad, that in any case, there's always going to be this sort of policing around queer people in general, because either you look too gay or you look too straight, or you're not dressed in the conventional way. The policing never stops, and you'd think that, like you said, your friends owned that lounge where you were not. We've talked about bouncers and staff being sensitized, but how much are the people who actually own the clubs and set the policies sensitized, because they're basically turning away people who would give them good business over and over.
And I've known, and this is an example where I think it's a clear example of this is a restaurant that is having a Valentine's Day special, right? A gay couple shows up and they're told, "Oh, today's Valentine's Day, no stag policy, so you go away." So this is a couple who is willing to pay whatever I never go to any restaurant on Valentine's Day because it's just exorbitant, overpriced, and cheap champagne, and I just end up with feeling really grumpy at the end of it. But here was a couple who was willing to do that and dish out the money, and they are turned away just because people don't think. And I think that is part of the problem, that sometimes people who own these places are sort of quote unquote very liberal and progressive, as in that they have a lot of gay friends, but they're all people like us. So they're happy to socialize with you at a party, but don't necessarily think through the policy change at the place that they own to make sure that people like you feel welcome, even if they do not know the owners. I don't want to be treated nicely just because, I am this person's friend. That, I think, is the problem. I mean, that's the problem with not just gay stuff. I think that's an Indian problem in general, that we rely so much on social connections and in order to get service, as opposed to just getting service because I am a decent paying customer who has come to your place.
Yeah, I think this was a better conversation than all the Twitter back and forth that has happened across this.
I think any conversation is usually better than the Twitter back and forth that happened.
Yeah. Anyway, with that, we come to the end of our first segment. Thank you so much for coming on to our show, Sandip.
Thank you, Sandeep.
Be sure to check out Sandeep's writing and listen to the very real conversations he has on the Sandip Roy show. And did I mention Sandeep was a lovely guest on Splainer's AMA earlier this year? Be sure to check that out. I will link it in the description. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Okay, we will be right back after a short break. You're listening to Press Decode on the IVM Podcast Network.
Eventually, you'll see the end of your childhood.
Get accustomed to womanhood.
Enjoy the experience of sisterhood.
Might get to wifehood.
Or not. Choose motherhood
Or not. You'll learn to define your personhood,
Earn a livelihood,
change the neighborhood.
and get rid of the falsehood that life post academia is easy.
So join me, Ritasha,
And me, Ayushi,
on a journey from station starting point
to station, what now?
next station, Pudin station, and hopefully Agla station, adulthood.
Fresh episodes out every Thursday.
Hello and welcome back to Press Decode on the IVM Podcast Network. We're Team Splainer. Make sure you follow us at SplainerIn on Instagram and Twitter to keep up with the Splainer fam. Okay, let's get on with our big story. Fulla, do you want to get us started?
Yes. So there was a big announcement of sorts this past weekend. Our dear Prime Minister said that the 3 farm laws that have been a point of contention for over a year will be repealed. Of course, in true fashion. No begrudging apology to the nation for not being able to change the minds of farmers also followed. Oh, and point to note, the farmers have been very vocal about their distrust of this announcement. According to them, any celebrations will take place after parliamentary procedure. But before I get carried away with that, let's look at why the farm laws have been this contested. So the first law is the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Bill of 2020, which allowed farmers to sell their harvest outside the government authorized mandis without requiring any state tax or fees. The second law is the Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Services. This allowed the farmers to directly sell their produce to companies or enter into contracts where they would be able to then sell produce at a price. And the third law, or the Essential Commodities Amendment Bill, removed all curbs on storing major foodstuffs, including cereals, pulses, and edible oils and onions, except in the case of a major emergency like the pandemic. What this means is that the laws introduced private players into the market and basically, tried to liberalize and make it a free market because all roads lead to Reliance and Adani. But what they did not do is offer price protection for the farmers, then left the farmers with no bargaining power. And once private players come in, which this will mean the mandis are obsolete, which will again mean that the farmers now have to fend for themselves. Also, in the third law, it basically removed all restrictions on stockpiling and hoarding all your essential commodities and store them for a long time. They can then sell the produce at higher prices when there is a drought or flood. Also crucial to note is that while the government's offer did protect the farmers' lands, the farmers themselves were left with no legal safeguards against any exploitation in the market.
Okay, so despite all clear problems that we non-policymakers can also see, what did this big, mighty announcement and apology mean? Which, may I add, was not about the failure of the law, but an apology because a small group of farmers did not understand the law well. I'm just saying, make of this what you will. Anyway, moving on very, very swiftly. Does the announcement of the withdrawal of these 3 laws actually mean that the farmer protests have been called off?
Not really. The farmers, again, because I said they will only fully call off the protest when the bills are repealed in Parliament, but also because the legislation that the farmers are pushing for is to protect the minimum support price, which the protests have been majorly surrounded around. As well as obviously the very real fear that they have that they will lose their entire livelihoods to corporate cost cutting and in all these contractual loopholes. There is evidence also of farmers having lost livelihoods already. When the lockdown of the mandis took place, for example, lots of states allowed farmers to sell their harvest directly. However, when the farmers did this, the amounts that they received for their produce were 10 to 15% less than what the MSP actually was.
10 to 15%?
Yes, and all this in the middle of a pandemic, imagine. And
wow.
Yeah. So now that the announcement has been made, the farmers have called for 5 things apart from guaranteeing that the MSP will be protected. these 5 things include dropping all cases against farmers and releasing farmers who've been arrested, getting rid of penalties for stubble burning, because whenever winter rolls around and the pollution debate comes up every time in Delhi, the first people to be blamed are farmers, because
Actually, I'd like to point out for our listeners, we have done a pretty good explainer on the whole controversy about Delhi and Delhi's air and whether or not stubble burning is to blame. I will link it below. Definitely read it.
Yeah. So again, because the farmers are being the people who get punished and dragged through the mud, they want, and the penalties also are really, really high for stubble burning, which the farmers claim they need for their harvest to, be fruitful and profitable. They want the penalties to be removed completely. They also want safeguard subsidies for electricity. They want compensation for families of the over 700 farmers who lost their lives during the course of the protest. And they want the union minister, Ajay Mishra, and all the others responsible for the Lakhimpur Kheri tragedy to be sacked and arrested.
Also, again, the Lakhimpur Kheri tragedy, for those of you who haven't kept up, we've done an explainer on the absolute tragedy and disaster that happened there. So, okay, it sounded like a victory at first on Friday, but it's clearly not the end of protest, and it's clearly validly so. But so now what? Like, now that this government has made this big, mighty gesture of being pro-farmer and just overall understanding, it's highly unlikely that they will cede any further ground. But the farmers are determined to stay the course. So here's where my big worry pops in, right? In addition to all the electoral concerns that led to this decision, we know we're not denying the UP elections, Punjab elections, and we've looked at it in our explainer. But over and above, a lot of people have been talking about electoral concerns. But this big gesture about repealing the laws might also just be a tactic to paint the farmers as unreasonable now, right? I mean, BBC News pointed it out. When things are not going in your favor, just make a move in order to deny advantage to your opponents from the emerging situation. The move to repeal the farm laws aims to do that in many ways. So now any demands beyond this just it makes the farmers look like, ab dekho, tumhe sab kuch chahiye. And I mean, if it is to say anything, Times of India has already published an op-ed detailing this supposed unreasonableness of the farmers, and it is predictably titled, "Draw a Red Line. Farm Union's current demands unreasonable. Government of India needs to hold firm. Push reforms."
It's a classic. It's a classic government tactic. It's something that this government has always. I will just come out and say it. This government loves to gaslight its people.
It is true though.
Yeah, I mean, having the farmers basically at the mercy of the state by introducing exploitative legislation, then over the last year having basically beat them up and dragged them through the mud in the media, and now paint them as misguided and ungrateful. It's a lot. Look at how it was framed when it was announced.
Precisely. And like you've already pointed out, amongst the other demands, I think the most important point that the farmers still protest for is the demand for MSP. And some experts have argued that by repealing the farm laws, the Modi government may have managed to stave off the elephant in the room, which, like you pointed out, was actually the crux of the protest, where at some point they have said, we will accept your farm laws as long as you guarantee MSP.
Correct.
And it's basically the legal demand for an MSP that has been the main aim. And the fact that the repealing of the laws was presented almost like a consolation for not understanding what's your own good, I won't be surprised if the next sticking point will be this demand for MSP. But again, I really need to know, what is the big deal with MSP?
Okay, so MSP, or minimum support price, has been at the very top of every list of demands from every single farmer union for well over a year. In fact, they've been asking for it for years because, whenever the economic reforms in agriculture come up, people are always like, yeah, we need to open up the market, we need to liberalize, we need to bring in private players and all that. Nobody stops to think about the farmers, because they're not, in general, sometimes they're facing trouble with their harvests so they don't earn a lot, or because of whatever reason, they get left with a lot of produce. So again, they're just left with a lot of crop in the end and nowhere to store it, which is why the government usually buys it from them at what is deemed a fair margin. However, this has not been decided according to what is most profitable or most sustainable even for the farmers. And on top of everything, so there's the legislation around it says that it's supposed to cover around 23 crops. The government right now covers only commodities like wheat and rice. As a result, farmers beyond Haryana and Punjab don't get paid MSP. In fact, in UP, they get paid way lower than what the actual price the government sets is. And then there's crops that the MSP doesn't cover. These face the risk of, fluctuating market prices, and then the prices for these are determined by global trends, seasonal factors, weather, demand and supply. So the farmers really don't have a chip to bargain at all if, the market becomes a free place where corporates are the ones dealing with small farmers who have no idea how global trends work, for example. So since farmers really can't do much in the private market, they're often forced to dump their crop or sell it dirt cheap so that also they then turn to MSP crops if they're not already growing MSP crop. That then hurts the environment. Like in Punjab, there is this huge paddy obsession, which has been depleting groundwater table levels for years. But this is what they're being paid for. So that's what they continue doing, although it harms the produce, their harvest, and their land. At the risk of, oversimplifying the farmers' demands for MSP, this is what they want: a guaranteed minimum price on every agricultural commodity for every farmer across the country. And this has to be fixed after factoring in all the costs that the farmer has to bear, and try and ensure that there is at least 50% profit margins for the farmers. And of course, making it illegal for buyers, whether it's the government itself or private players who try to purchase under this price.
Yeah. So, clearly for anyone who was celebrating the repealing of the farm laws, this isn't the end. And maybe we should once again pass the mic and actually listen to what the farmers are saying, where they're saying we're still holding ground and waiting. On that note, we've come to the end of this segment. We will be right back after a short break. You're listening to Press Decode on the IVM Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, it's been a great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Advertising is Dead, Varun talks to Paul Ravindranath Ji, Program Manager, Developer Relations, and Head of Google Accelerator for India. They discuss the startup ecosystem and how Google is enabling innovation through this program. On Shunya One, Sheila Datti and myself talk to Abel Joseph, founder and CEO of Isle. We discuss how Isle is a truly Indian dating app. It's not so much as a dating app as a matching app. It's a really interesting conversation. You should definitely check that out. On Postcards from Nowhere, Utsav uncovers the hidden injustice in India's languages and how it shapes the way we travel and interact with people. On the Life Manifesto, Zarina debunks leadership myths that are popular amongst people. And on Khel Niti, Rajiv Mishra, Nikhil Chopra, and Ayaz Memon discuss Australia winning the T20 World Cup. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Also, do check out our various YouTube channels. You can catch them on IVM Podcast/YouTube. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors on the network this week: Cred, Bank of Baroda, Quota, CoinSwitch, Kuber, Slay Coffee, Intel, and Oxfam India. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Welcome back to Press Decode on the IVM Podcast Network. It's time for our final segment this week, Roast or Toast. Prafulla.
Yes, since I am back, it is only fitting that I return with today's episode's least fave. My victim today is advertising and advertisers. So capitalism has found a new way to hack your dreams, folks. They're trying to sell you products while you sleep. And all this, they're trying to do product placement while we're trying to escape the capitalist hellscape that we're already in. But I'm making it sound like it's out of a sci-fi scenario, but it's already happening. Coors actually ran what they call the world's largest dream study the night before the Super Bowl. The idea was to put images of Coors beer into dreamers' minds They even hired a Harvard psychologist to design, and I'm quoting, dream incubation stimuli. They offered free drinks to get people to participate and even had Zayn Malik agree to sleep on Instagram Live while having an quote unquote incubated Coors dream. I don't know what he must have dreamt about. I mean, to give Zayn credit, he did say the project was kind of messed up, for which I say thanks, I guess.
I am suitably horrified.
I was hoping this would be your reaction.
But now that Prafulla is back, I don't feel the pressure to have a least fave item. Thank God for that. Anyway, my favorite item was Instagram's 2 new features. It's called Rage Shake and Carousel Deletion. Can I just say, for a serial shit poster, the carousel deletion is going to be life-changing. Alas, it isn't available for us Android plebes as yet, but soon, my Insta is going to be so cleaned up, So amen. Anyway, I kept the best feature for the end. It's Rage Shake. To begin with, I love it. And it will allow users to basically report problems that they're experiencing with the app. And here's how they described it on Twitter. Maybe stories didn't load. Maybe the audio wasn't working. Maybe you just couldn't upload a photo and it was just really getting to you. Really just pissing you off. Well, now you can literally shake the phone and a little option will come up that allows you to report the problem. Honestly, I don't even care about the reporting the problem bit, but just imagine how much of life would be made better if you could just shake things, shake people and find solutions, no?
But also shaking my phone is what I do when I get on Twitter in general.
So Instagram's just following suit. Anyway, that was our show this week. Thank you so much for joining us on Press Decode. You can catch us every Thursday on the IVM Podcast Network. And guys, please remember, don't let the news give you the blues.
Namaste, this is Cyrus Brocha. I am part of the government cancel culture program to remove rubbish off all the different streams available. So what we have is all the collected rubbish we put together on our show. It's called Cyrus Says. It's on IVM Podcast. You have to watch it and listen to it. It's on our app. It's on our website. It's on the YouTube channel. It's on Facebook. There are many different ways. Don't bother me and ask me how. You have to find out. We talk to different personalities. Many of them are known. Some are just people we meet downstairs and invite them up for chai. But the point is, it's fun and it's very therapeutic. So please join in and listen to Cyrus Says.
If you're a cricket fan, check out Edges and Sledges, India's favorite cricket podcast.
The podcast focuses on Indian cricket, the IPL, and has a ton of banter both on and off the field.
We talk about the week's biggest cricket stories with current and ex-international cricketers, coaches, or sometimes just between us.
And it's hosted by me, DJ.
Me, Varun.
And me, Ashwin.
New episodes release every week.
You can catch us on the IVM Podcast's website, app,
or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Check out the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast.